surviving synagogue in Essen, the old synagogue in Essen. Amongst many awards, the 2002 Gruber-Rosenzweig Medal of Merit in North Rhine-Westphalia, and something actually quite personal to Bard, because he's a friend of Bard, has spoken here many times, and his daughter went to Bard, the Hans Ehrenberg Prize of the Protestant churches of Bochum. In any case, Edna Brocke is someone that we at the Arendt Center have always wished would come, and never really knew. I honestly say, it's a new center. We haven't been doing this very long, and when I found out that you were coming to New York and would come up here, I was really pleased. So it's a pleasure to welcome you here to Bard and to the Hannah Arendt Center. And she's going to tell some stories of her time with Hannah Arendt, but also talk a little bit about her impression of. She accompanied Hannah Arendt to the Eichmann trials, and talked many times with her about that, so she'll have some things to say about that. I think she said she's going to keep it brief, and then we'll have questions and a nice discussion. So, Edna Brocke.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Because my sister and myself, we were the last living members of Hannah's family. And so this is our motivation to come here and to meet people who are connected to Hannah Arendt, be it as artists, be it as scientists, be it as scholars. And that's our motive to be here. And I've been here in Bard in 1976 when the urn of Hannah was interred here in Bard. But since I haven't been here, so it's a big gap. Thank you for being able to talk to you. I'll try to make it short. The first part, a little biographical. The second, a little from the perspective of someone who is an Israeli but lives for many years in Germany and sees how the discourses in Germany, how they maybe differ from what is going on in the United States. So 2 parts. First part, Flöschlein was really the word, my nickname, and Hannah Arendt was the person to make our parents meet. Because when she was dismissed from school in Königsberg, her mother sent her to some of her best friends in Berlin. These were the parents of my mother. So Hannah visited the best friends of her mother in Berlin because she was there as an extern student to have her, how do you say, baccalaureate?
Grammar school.
When you end...
This is the high school?
Yes.
High school.
Okay.
I think.
After 12th grade.
Yes, high school.
Oh, so in college.
Yes. And so there she met our mother. There were 4.5 years difference of age. Hannah was 4.5 years older. And in 1925, she took her good friend from Berlin to accompany her to Königsberg to meet her family there. And there was her favorite cousin, which later happened to be our father. And so when my parents left Germany already in 1934, analyzing the elections in January 33, they understood for us Jews there is no place in Germany, and the only place they could go to was in Israel, because for the United States they had no money to come here. And okay, so that because they were not Zionists, but they went to Israel. And when my sister was born there, of course they gave her the name Hannah, because Hannah Arendt brought them together. Now the first daughter, or the first child was a daughter, she received the name of Hannah. In 1955, Hannah Arendt invited our mother, for a trip to Greece, and they came together back to Israel. My mother came back to Israel, and Hannah came again to visit us in Israel, first time after the war. And I always heard in the family, when they were talking about Hannah Arendt, she was die große Hannah, the big Hannah, because this one was the little Hannah. And so I was 12 when we went to the airport in Tel Aviv to, my mother and Hannah arrived just to take them from the airport, and I expected, of course, a big Hannah. And there came just a normal, very thin lady, not very tall, not very fat. So I asked my father, why do you call her die große Hannah? So the große Hannah and die kleine Hannah, that's the background, how I met her, or she met me at the age of 12. And since whenever she came to Israel, of course we met. We had a very, very near and good communication. She adopted me as her favorite from the whole Israeli family, and we remained in very, very good contact until she died. The last time I saw her in July 75, that is to say half a year before she died, in Marbach, where she organized the estate, of the literary estate of Jaspers. And she stayed there for 4 weeks, and my husband then and myself, we met her for, I think, 4 or 5 days in Marbach. It was a marvelous, marvelous time, and this was the last time when I saw and heard her. And in my ear, we brought her to the train station, to the railway station, and she went to Heidegger. And so I asked her, is it really necessary? Because I knew the whole discussion between my parents and her, and so I just asked her, is it really necessary? And she told me, I still hear it when she was, I'm saying it in German, Fröschlein, es gibt Dinge, die sind stärker als der Mensch. There are things stronger than man or Mensch. And that was the last sentence I heard from her. So between 1955 and 75, we met a lot of times because my husband then, we went for 1 year to Europe. I couldn't imagine there is a country where you can study for free. I couldn't imagine there is a country where you can study as long as you wish for free. And so when he said we were going for 1 year, I thought it's 1 year. It took him 7.5 years, so that's why he exported me to Germany, and that's why I'm still living in Germany. That's the personal part. We've met in several parts of Germany, in Frankfurt, in Munich. She came to visit us in Regensburg, in Bavaria. We met regularly every year. She invited us to Tenia, the place in Switzerland where she stayed in the summer for 2 or 3 months. So we were very, very close in those years, between 68 and 75. So that's how my personal relationship with her. 1961, she came to Israel for the Eichmann trial, and she took me several times with her to attend one of the sessions. I don't remember, but as a journalist, she had the possibility to get tickets and take people with her to the whole. I see the place in my inner eye. It was normally you have a room where here is the stage and you have the rows that way. In Jerusalem, here was the stage and here were very long rows, like in a stadium, and everywhere it was a new technology. We had simultaneous translation. And all the cables, the electric, etc. were running there. I was 17, and I was interested also in hearing what's happening, but of course technology, which was not her interest, interested me. And it was especially interesting because from home I knew some German, of course Hebrew, and most of the trial was bilingual, Hebrew and German. But when the witnesses from Poland, from Hungary, from Romania, etc., when they spoke in their language, not in Hebrew, some of them spoke in Hebrew, then we could use the translation in order to understand those languages. And she always was very angry with me that I'm so much interested in this technology and not in the very important things that are going on. But she accepted it. And we had a lot of discussions concerning the role, for example, of David Ben-Gurion. She accused him of being too political, and the whole trial had a political impulse. Looking back, I think it might be true that he had the political impulse, but not the way she saw it. It was not in order to tell us, the young generation in Israel, is the saying is going now, also in Israel. People say this was the main aim of Ben-Gurion. I think he wanted to show the world, if we do not present all those survivors, who will do it? And if we don't try to have one person from the whole system of the Nazi regime, one person as an example for what Hannah Arendt thought to be the aim, I think that was what made Ben-Gurion run and have this trial in Jerusalem. So we had a lot of discussions, her view, my view. Okay, I was 17. That's the relation concerning these sessions. But we were very close in our analysis, for example, of the person of Eichmann. He was sitting in this glass cabinet or
Cage.
Right.
And the main thing I remember was Jawohl, Jawohl, Jawohl. I still hear this Jawohl, like as if he still is an officer. And whenever he was talking, it was always in this very harsh tone, but not very intelligently. Whereas the defender, it was a West German advocate, Salatius. He was a very impressive person, not only because he filled the room, he was very impressive in the way he tried to defend him without trying to offend any of the witnesses, any of the others. And the persecutor, Gideon Hausner, was a very difficult person for us young Israelis at that time, because he had also a tone different from Eichmann. He didn't say Jawohl, but he was very aggressive too, in his way. And so this was, for example, a theme where Hannah and I very often shared the same opinion about these three people. Of course, Moshe Landau, the chief judge, great. So we were really very close in our judgment. So far as to my recollections, very briefly, to the Eichmann trial. First part, finished. Second part. What makes me run and try to bring into your perspective and hear from you your dealings with Hannah Arendt here is that in Germany there are two different intellectual discourses running at the same time and also overlapping in several parts of it. I'll try to describe those two discourses as short as possible. There is one discourse, especially by people who started to argue against Hannah Arendt since her book on totalitarianism appeared in Germany in 1955. The main interest was by people from then DDR, East Germany, which was, in her terminology, definitely a totalitarian state. And people in East Germany were very eager to prove to the whole world, in times of the Cold War, of course, but nonetheless after the so-called end of the Cold War, to show that East Germany may be defined as a dictatorship, but never as a totalitarian system. What makes these people, and many in West Germany all those years, shared this view and shared the intention to have Hannah Arendt's theory wiped out. Their interest is to say East Germany didn't have any mass murderer in their system, and East Germany was not totalitarian in the sense that Hannah Arendt said. The Soviet Union on the one hand and National Socialism on the other hand are to be compared as parallel systems, whereas the ideology, the underlying ideology, of course differs. It was, her intent was not to say they are the same in the political ideology, but she argued they are the same in the way these two systems try to have every citizen of those countries or systems be totally, therefore the term totalitarianism, totally for this system. And the system just tried to have every citizen as a active part of the system, which differs from a dictatorship. And the East German government, as well as many people in West Germany, thought that the better German state of post-war time was East Germany, and denied this totalitarian aspect of East Germany. Now and they had a group of professors in West Berlin, well paid by both sides, because they were a professor at the university in Berlin, but well paid by the Stasi of East Germany, to prove as political scientists that East Germany is not a totalitarian state. One of the very famous professors is a Professor Zimmermann. In his Sefer Yovel, for his 60th birthday, they gave him a Festschrift.
Yeah. Same word.
In English, Festschrift.
Yeah.
Okay. In which it's very clear in 1988, so shortly before the opening of the Berlin Wall, where he already understood, even before the fall of the wall, he already understood that the East German system was a totalitarian. So he quit this group of professors who tried over all those years, since 1955, to prove that it was not. He is one person who changed his mind very clearly. He's not the only one to have understood it's really more than only a normal dictatorship. After the fall of the wall, it has become a very different Germany, where in the West many of the people still think that the Eastern German system was the better, and their only fault was in economic questions, not in political, not in humanitarian, in all the rest, no. they claim that the only mistake of East German regime was that they didn't build up a good economic system. And it's very difficult to discuss with people who think that way, that one can look at the real political situation also very differently. And so this discourse concerning Hannah Arendt was even stronger against her after the unification of the two states, so 1990. I thought in 1995 in our center in the Alte Synagoge in Essen, 20 years that she died, we had a big conference, and we had several people who probably for sure you know. Jerry was there and Sheila bin Habib was there, so several people you know, but also left German professors for political science and philosophy, and many of them said, well, until the Soviet Union broke down, we never ever even read her book. She was out before having read it. I said, well, intellectually, but okay. Now that we read it, we start to think differently. I said, well, Otto Karlsruhe, the name?
Karlsruhe?
Otto Karlsruhe.
I don't know.
No? Well, he was one of the very interesting professors saying, well, I really started, in the first place, I read the book, and in the second place, I started to see things differently. So, already in 1995, this discourse went apart. There were some, like Otto Karlsruhe, who said, I read it and I learned from it. Many maybe read it, but they didn't change their mind. So this is one intellectual discourse, so that in many universities in Germany today, you will not find professors who are keen in political science to have a seminar on Hannah Arendt and totalitarianism. It's really, I tried a survey, it's very difficult. You will find Professor König in Aachen, okay, there are 2 or 3, but you will not find for totalitarianism really any interest at universities in Germany. I wondered why. I guess I start to understand, because this discourse goes together with a second one. It's the discourse, especially among Jews, but not only, people who want to see Eichmann only as a monster. And what Hannah Arendt, in my view, saw very correctly is that it is definitely worse than a mass murder, because he always said, I didn't kill anyone. It was a crime sitting next to his table and planning the logistics in order to get as many Jews as possible killed. But he personally didn't kill, so it was a new phenomenon of criminology. It was a new form of crime. And of course, in one sense, he was a mass murderer, but a different one than mass murders before. And many Jews, not only, but many Jews are afraid, if they would see that Eichmann was a bureaucrat that used this totalitarian system, or the system used him, in order to succeed in the common aim or target, that is to say that many, many other bureaucrats could become an Eichmann if the system would be a totalitarian system. And that is definitely worse than having a monster. A monster is something very special. you have some monsters in history, of course, but Eichmann was worse than a monster, because many in this totalitarian system, in the Soviet system and in the Nazi system, were, as Hannah wrote in her book, ein Hans Wurst, an ordinary person. He was not a monster. Now, for the people who want to defend East Germany as a dictatorship but not totalitarian state, they need Eichmann as a monster in order to say in the East German system there was no monster. And therefore they use this inner Jewish discourse mainly here in the United States. Even in Israel, it's no longer so definite. Even in Israel, many Jews start to see that Eichmann, as terrible as he was not the monster. He was a bureaucrat within this totalitarian system. And the overlapping of these two discourses in Germany result in the fact that Hannah Arendt is not only misunderstood in what she has written, because you may agree or disagree with what she has written. That's not the point. She's shown not as what she has written. She is driven into a corner where she definitely doesn't belong. And that's what made me run, or what made us run, to come here and to convey to you what's happening in Germany. And that is maybe a very special problem. I don't know the situation in France, so I can tell you only about what I really live now very intensely in Germany. And then I stop, and the floor is yours for questions.
Thank you very much. Before I open it for general questions, I just have one small question. When she whispered in your ear at the trans text that es gibt Dinge, die stärker der Menschen sind,
Sind stärker als der Mensch.
What do you think, Dinge? Was this? Have you thought? Do you have an opinion on what she meant by that? Was it? I have ideas, but I wonder what your thought is.
I have ideas too, but I didn't have an opportunity to ask her.
Right.
So it's all
So the
what
context
is in my mind.
The context didn't give you a sense of what she meant.
Well, she knew that my parents had a big discussion with her. I wouldn't say fight, but my parents were really very critical about the whole Heidegger thing. And I knew about it. And in many senses, also her criticism of Zionism, her criticism of Ben-Gurion, and her whatever relationship with Heidegger were three themes where my parents and Hannah really went apart. And so it was my role, because I saw her very frequently, it was my role to keep their friendship, even though they were in so important points, so divergent in their opinions. So I was kind of mediator between my parents and Hannah in these three subjects. So I know she knew that I'm in between, and I was much too young in order to dare criticize her. I always tried to ask, but I never dared criticize. So asking her, is it really necessary, was already from my side a step forward. I couldn't know that 6 months later she's going to die. So it was my progress in trying to get it. I think she knew our criticism in the personal realm as well as in the political. And she wanted to give me the sign, well, that's the way I interpret it. I know you are against, but please, there are things that are stronger than what I can really control. So let me do. But that's only what happens in my head. I don't know, I had no chance to verify.
Are there other questions that come to people?
Or comments.
I got one here.
I was intrigued by your comment about Hannah Arendt's perception that Ben-Gurion was being political in forwarding the Eichmann trial, and that you say your parents also really strongly disagreed with the position, right? Could you say a little bit more about that debate, because I don't have as firm a grasp on it. That is, since the effect of the trial was to foreground the bureaucratic character of this man, and to show those of us who very much agree with her what real monstrosity is. The monstrosity is the absence of the monster, is the mundanity. Then, in a way, if it was political with a good effect. So I just wondered if you could say a little bit more about this.
Yeah. One of her arguments was, from the long list of witnesses, in terms of the trial, they were not necessary. Because they told their personal story. The addressees were not the three judges. The addressees was the world, the public.
Right.
But in terms of a trial, they were not necessary, because they didn't prove anything concerning Adolf Eichmann. Whatever they suffered and whatever they told us should be told to the world, yes, but not via a trial, which is a juristische,
Juridical, yeah.
It's a legal question.
Yeah.
And they didn't add to the legal question whether he's guilty or not. Because there was no connection between those people in one of the concentration camps and Adolf Eichmann. So she argued, and many others with her argued, it is a kind of show trial. A show trial in order to show to the world what happened to so many Jews who survived, and think about all those who didn't survive. This was one aspect. Another aspect was that he really wanted to make it a political vehicle in order to discuss the whole Holocaust, not in terms of part of World War II, but as a special issue within World War II, because it probably wouldn't have been possible to organize all those crimes in peacetime. But the Holocaust is not a part of the military strategy of the Nazis. They did, what Eichmann did is totally irrational. He used all those trains in order to bring Jews from Rhodos and Greece and I don't know, to Poland in order to kill them. And the Wehrmacht needed all those trains for military transports, etc. Yeah. So it was absolutely irrational what Eichmann did. To show this would have been, in her mind, more important than to bring all those witnesses. It's a different view on the trial. You may agree or disagree, but that's what was important to her. And the third point, I name it with personal difficulty, because you know that many of the German Jews had great problems with the so-called Ostjuden, who came from Poland and etc., who came to Germany before the war. And many of them were Orthodox and were not really integrated, definitely not assimilated to the majority society in Germany. And many of the German Jews whose parents came, say, 3 generations earlier, but they were already, they benefited from their position as legal citizens of those countries, where it was open for them to become professors, to become politicians, whatnot. So, 1812, this poison edict. And they thought our future is going to be disturbed by those Orthodox Jews coming from East Europe into the realm where we already achieved something like being normal citizens of Germany. And so Ben-Gurion, he was not personally Orthodox, but he came from a very, very Orthodox background in Poland. He was a socialist and a Zionist who tried to leave this religious ghetto and build up a different society in Israel, and I think he did. So these irrational feelings were also, they played a role in her reaction to Ben-Gurion.
Wonderful answer, thank you.
Can you say something more about the Ostjuden, her reaction to them? A lot has been made of 1 or 2 letters that she wrote, especially to Karl Jaspers, where she describes the feeling of the police who were often Ostjuden, and she felt like she were under military siege or something like that. And people have accused her of even anti-Semitism for these feelings, and certainly within the context of West and East Jude, Ostjuden and Westjuden, there's an explanation for that. But it would be helpful to hear your account of how she interacted with Ostjuden at the trial and in Israel, and how she, how you experienced her as a Jew reacting to other Jews and different kinds of Jews in Israel at the time.
Well, I will use a very common phrase. Some of my best friends are Jews,
Right.
so some of her best friends were Ostjuden. In order to say she didn't have a problem to be friends with so-called Ostjuden, but the moment it became a matter of political might or political power, then all those things came up from her guts. It was not on the person-to-person basis, but at the moment when it started to become really a political issue, then she was very, very sensitive.
Was there something in particular? Was it a feeling of living in a religious state, or was it
No.
No.
No, it was a resentment.
A resentment, yeah. No, a prejudgment, a
Or
prejudice.
yeah, or whatnot.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's helpful. But it was not. But for your mind, it was. So it was political. It was a political
Yes.
prejudice of some sort
Yes.
against those.
Because she had many friends
Yes.
who were Ostjuden, and it never was a problem. Many other friends were German Jews, but this was not the issue for her on the personal basis.
Okay, good. That's helpful. The other questions or comments? Yeah. Great.
I guess I'm interested in your very useful concluding statements on sort of the reception of Arendt in Germany. I guess my first question is sort of what you think the stakes of that are. In other words, is this just a question of something that's blocking the reception of Hannah Arendt, or do you see it as a sort of larger problem? Because as somebody who studies German history, it's sort of interesting for me because I think a lot of it has to do with the dislike of the American use of totalitarianism during the Cold War by many people in West Germany, where it was really felt that was oversimplifying things. They looked at it as sort of dangerous. And Arendt's book, of course, is much more complicated than that. So I see that as something of value just in itself. But I guess my first question is sort of what then you see the stakes of that being? Because it seems like that's really sort of a central part of what your argument is. And then just on a personal level, I was wondering if that has any connection with your work with the Christian community in Germany and sort of interest in taking the Christian
Okay. second question, no.
That one's easy.
It's short and sharp, no. The first question is very complicated. It took me a long time to trace what I tried to say with the overlapping of those two discourses. In the first place, because all the years, 23 years, where I was the director of this Jewish center in Essen, I was so preoccupied with the work there and the Christian-Jewish dialogue in theological terms that I just didn't have the capacity to be engaged in all those publications in Germany of Hannah Arendt, the letters between Hannah and Jasper and Hannah and Mary and Hannah and I just looked into the books, I just had some impression, and as I knew most of the people with whom she had those correspondences, I didn't go deep enough into the whole matter. For me personally, I retired last year, and a month after I retired, I went to Berlin to a conference, 50 Years Eichmann Trial. And this conference opened me a whole new world, and since I'm kind of investigating what are the targets. And it's very difficult for me now to give you a short answer because it has to do with the situation in Germany, at least as I see it, the whole social, economic, political situation in this unified Germany. And since the unification, the country has changed so deeply and totally in so many respects that it's necessary for me to tell you a bit more about this change of West Germany before in order to make my point. Therefore, I'm not really answering you because I would need too much time. It's not so simple that I can say first, second, third target is the simplest was my effort to show you that there are many people in both parts of Germany who wish to show that Eastern Germany was not a totalitarian state. There are many reasons why they want to show it, but this is one of the main discourses. But there are others too, other targets. Now, Germany is a country, how should I say, in the European Union, they are the strongest economy. They are confronted with a responsibility for economics, politics, etc., which make Germany to become the most important country in this so-called union. And immediately, even before it started with Greece, different currents started to warn Germany is becoming again the strongest and the richest and Merkel is and the country is so divided. Not the word between right and left is not correct. It's a deeper division. And it has also to do with the migration, especially of Muslims, who on their side are not trying to integrate in Germany because they're not like here. Migrants who come to the state don't get social benefits. They have to try for their own and just have to work for it. In Germany, so these are real. Sure. Many example for a family with 4 or 5 children. They live only on the welfare. They don't have to work, and they live quite well. And so, when you talk about social justice in Germany today, it's a totally different question from social justice, for example, in the United States, as far as I read papers and know what's going on. It's Okay, so now because so I would have wished I could answer you a real short question.
Mm-hmm.
The political one is for sure. Phenomenon, very new, we talked about it, are those young people with the party, the Pirates. They reached today in the polls 12% already, I read in the internet. But where does it lead to? And those who are interested in showing that East Germany was not a totalitarian state, they have their old and very solid political view on things, and they try for the next elections in 2013, together with a party called The Left, to reach power. And they definitely say they want to have a democratic socialism in Germany. They want to change everything. They want to nationalize banks, etc., etc. So we know what they are planning. And these two discourses are one very central aspect, not the only one. And all the rest next time. I'm sorry.
No, that's helpful. And I think your description of it is hinging on the reading of the DDR makes a lot of sense to me, actually. And I hadn't thought of that in terms of the reception. I would have placed it first in terms of the reception of the Nazi part of the book and sort of how that's read. But I think you're right that this is actually sort of, in the last 30 years, secondary. So
Yes.
it's very helpful.
I just had a, this might be more a comment, but it was interesting to me your description of how totalitarianism as a system is being rejected by multiple groups in former East and West Germany, because it seems like in the United States there have been a few studies that have come out reevaluating Eichmann as his deep anti-Semitism. So he's not just a desk officer who sits and wants to succeed in terms of his job, but he was a deeply sort of sadistic anti-Semite, and that seems to be a very sort of a relatively new and dominant discourse with respect to Eichmann here. And it just made me think the way you describe him. I mean, I think one thing that at least and I think maybe a lot of the scholars kind of working on this, I mean, I don't know what they're actually thinking, but one thing it seems to kind of tend towards is almost in a way taking, on the one hand, sort of doing exactly what you say this discourse, this anti-totalitarian discourse is doing, which is to kind of make very unique the origins and potential for, totalitarianism, for oppression, and all the other kind of bad that comes along with it. But in this reevaluation of Eichmann, it also seems to be, in a way, kind of systematizing it insofar as I think one implication is that Germany, kind of full at that time, at least, full of just people who were sort of on a mission to kill Jews, essentially, independent of what system they, in which they were embedded. But that also, during your talk, it just made me think that also, that doesn't necessarily sort of generalize what should be a concern with totalitarianism. It makes it a particularly maybe national thing, which is not about individual monsters, but about particular national monsters and the prejudice. And I just thought it was I just thought it was a very interesting, and it seems to me an analysis that, I mean, I haven't read all of these books, and but something that I suspect might not be really given a lot of attention in these new, what should be kind of new evaluations. In all these books, they sort of they start from Arendt's description of Eichmann and kind of really push against her attempt to make him not normal, obviously, because but to take away these sort of individual psychological motivations that are grounded in,
You can see it in the videos in Yad Vashem. You can see hours and hours of the trial, the original tapes of that time. I didn't watch hours, but I watched several hours now in preparation for a discourse I gave in Germany. You can see this person, the way he answered. He was a child of his time. At that time, in whole Europe, anti-Semitism was the normal daily way of reacting to the, for example, 1812 Preußen Edict, where Jews became the same rights as other citizens. It's odd to say that Eichmann was especially, and he was just like many other, not Germans, Poles, Ukrainian, etc., etc. He was not different. One was more and one was less in his emotional. And when you watch those videos, you can see them by Yad Vashem. They have it on their homepage. And I was in the trial. Okay, I was 17, but he never ever made on me the impression that he's really a very aggressive person. Really not. He was just, how do you say in English, mishamem, boring. He was just boring. Whereas this advocate, he was a real personality. And as long as we know, as much as we know, Servatius was paid by the state of Israel. He got only 10,000 or 15,000 marks from a German institution. The rest, the state of Israel paid, in order to have a fair trial for Eichmann. He was a personality. I don't know what he thought about Jews, no idea. But Eichmann was just boring. So I wonder why this wave of reconsidering the whole Eichmann book of Hannah and the efforts to show that Eichmann was a terrible anti-Semite, and the Sassen interviews, they were taken in Argentina. One Nazi and another Nazi sit together in exile, and one is trying to help the other to become again a very important person. So, as a scholar, those who are reading these interviews have to think under which conditions they were created. What was the intention of Sassen? What was maybe the intention of Eichmann? How do I evaluate those texts? Okay, they're written, yes, but I have to think about what was the message of both people who were working together after the war, far in Argentina, and one in Germany, a good job. So when you read those Sassen papers, with this intention, you read them differently. I don't say it's better or worse, but you have to think about the possible background of both sides.
Well, I wonder if, the exhibit in Berlin a few years ago showing I don't know, but I wonder if this is a trend in Germany too. The exhibit in Berlin showing the kind of the everyday objects of, everyone from children to just people going around during the Third Reich, and kind of, the part of the message being that anti-Semitism just ran so deep that it can't be left out as part of the causal explanation for the Second World War and the Holocaust. Because the implication being that before it really was almost stayed true more to Arendt's analysis, that it was more the structural analysis that looked at not just economics, imperialism, or what have you, but just the entire bureaucratic structure of how people are situated with respect to their regimes and their political communities.
Mm.
But it seems like, I don't know, from one exhibit I'm making but it seems like at least this exhibit is not, it seems to be very much in line with what's what appears in part to be a trend of this reevaluation of Eichmann, of Germany, and trying to place once again anti-Semitism and the genocidal spirit that arose from that at this particular time as part. And I just wonder if that you do see that in Germany, or if you think that the discussion is more the way you had originally described it, that it's about rehabilitating or maintaining an image of East Germany as a system.
In my view, it goes together. But you mean the exhibition at the Hannah Arendt room for the centennial?
No. It was at the main museum. It was I think it was maybe 2 years ago. It was sort of everyday found objects of everything from puzzle pieces to puppets, where there were puppets of Jewish figures that German, non-Jewish German children would play with, and playing cards. Does anyone know what playing cards that had figures of terrible looking Jewish people? And the idea was just, if you kind of look at the way people are living every day and the objects that they're making and being confronted with from little children, little children having games where the villains are Jewish, and that it was, it's not just economics or the military or some kind of bureaucratic thing, but it's they were just people were so anti-Semitic that there's even puppets with
I didn't see the exhibition, so
I
cannot respond specifically to
name.
this. But there was a Hannah Arendt room in 2006 for the centennial, and there was a very interesting program by Hefti, Hefti from Zurich.
Is it artist?
No, he's an Hannah Arendt expert from Switzerland. Okay, his concept was a totally different one, and then other people in Berlin took over and had a totally different concept. So when you compare the two concepts of the one that finally was realized is the way you explained it, I think it's a trend. It's a trend. But not only concerning Hannah Arendt, it's a trend, at least in Germany. I cannot speak for Europe, I can speak only for Germany. The effort to show everyday life in many other contexts too. And one of them is the Jewish context.
Thanks for your talk. I guess I'm curious. It seems in the reading that I've done of Arendt and of people who write about Arendt, that there are sort of two sides to her, and people use her or write on one side or the other. There's the side that is the political judgments that she makes of Eichmann, of Little Rock, and maybe others that I'm missing, and people engage in that debate with her. Or there's the more sort of theoretical, philosophical side, and the two are related, but I feel like people tend to one or the other side of her, at least in the work that I've encountered, and I wonder if there are those two strains in Germany as well, or if people who know more about how she's received in America, if that resonates.
As far as I know, I just put it into brackets because I'm not really totally in the whole discourse. As far as I know, there are more than only those two sides of her in the discourse. Personally, I would give two answers. In the first, I would say every one of us knew another Hannah Arendt, because she was so a broad personality that each and everyone, even in our family, we had so different perceptions of her. And we always finally said, well, you see her that way, you see her. Let us see all the views, and then we maybe have Hannah really near to our heart. And in the discourse, I would say, I would wish that in Europe or in Germany, people would not say either or, but should say this as well as that, as well as that, because Hannah could have said 10 years later something which seems to be opposed to what she said 10 years earlier, but it's not necessarily opposed. You have to go with her the whole way of those 10 years in order to understand why she says 10 years later something that seems to be the opposite. But you have to be ready to see a very complex work. The only criticism, and I told it, Jeff, on the way when we went from the library, personally, I really regret, and I had a big argument with her very, very often. She was a very assimilated Jew. She was always very proud to be invited in for Pesach, for Seder, at Finkelstein's from JTS. It was very important to her. And she was very